Now, a special 2-part edition of 48 Hours.
You don't know exactly what you're going to be finding up there, and so just driving up there in itself, you're kind of walking into the unknown. I believe I was a little nervous.
I would describe it as being absolutely savage.
This was someone who used a baseball bat to kill the family.
What I see is an attack that is not only calculated and carried out with precision.
There was blood all over the room, on the ceiling, on the floor.
I also see a crime scene that smacks of the murderer having a very, very personal vendetta.
Somebody just went off the deep end, and once they started killing, they either enjoyed it or they couldn't stop themselves.
In an upper middle class neighborhood of an upper middle class community, 3 unsuspecting and undeserving human beings were savagely beaten to death.
There's blood, they're not breathing. I don't think it's safe here.
By somebody who they knew. It was a plan, a well-rehearsed, well-thought-out plan.
What happened in this house on a hot summer night in 1994 brought tragedy and mystery to this quiet neighborhood in Bellevue, Washington. Just after 2 in the morning on July 13th, police were called to a crime that would take them 10 years to bring to justice.
Had you ever seen anything like it?
Never.
James Jude Conant is a senior deputy prosecutor in King County. He and a team of detectives have been haunted by this crime and the killers who got away.
They think that they are smarter than other people in the world. And I know that sounds just kind of a broad statement, but I really believe they believe that.
The search for the truth would lead police to another country through a web of intriguing clues. Could this screenplay that described a murder unlock the mystery? And in the end, would a sophisticated undercover operation set in a make-believe world of crime catch the real killers? The story begins with a call for help.
Emergency, what are you reporting? My friend, his mom and dad, we think they're dead.
Sebastian Burns and his friend Atif Rafay had stumbled on a horrific scene. Atif's parents had been murdered.
There is nothing that I can imagine about my parents that could have justified anyone to do what was done to them.
Sultana Rafay, Atif's mother, was the first to be killed.
Sebastian, what did you see when you walked through that door?
We saw Atif's mom lying on the floor.
Tariq Rafay was the next to be murdered.
We could see there was blood around him, and it was clear that he had been attacked.
Why do you think that they're dead? There's blood, they're not breathing, there's blood all over his face.
It was basically an overkill.
Detective Bob Thompson has been on the case since the night it began.
It just looked like someone had hit him 40 or 50 times.
Please, fast, okay?
Yes, they're on the way.
Okay.
They're on the way.
We'll be outside.
Okay, go ahead.
As the boys waited for help to arrive, a third victim, Atif's autistic older sister Basma, was clinging to life, moaning in her bedroom.
The third victim was autistic. It would make sense that she's murdered last because everybody knows that she can't make a 911 call.
Basma died a few hours later at the hospital, taking with her the secret of who killed the Rafay family. The Rafays had just moved to Bellevue from Vancouver, Canada. Sultana had a doctorate in nutrition, but devoted her life to raising her gifted son and disabled daughter.
I think she was certainly an extraordinary person.
Do you miss your mom?
I do.
What do you miss most about her?
Well, the mere presence is enough, but she knew me in a way that I suspect that no one ever will. She was always able to look right through the adolescent sort of pomposities that I might have had and remind me that I was just a silly kid at times.
Tariq Rafay was a structural engineer who had worked on buildings around the world.
In a sense, we were all like kids around him, or like my mom was too, and we were all, I guess, sort of in his orbit. He was a brilliant person, probably a far better mathematician than I will ever be.
No one could understand who would take the lives of this quiet family and spare their only son. Detectives began to look more closely at the crime scene.
What's the problem there? There's been some kind of break-in.
Sebastian had used the words break-in to report what had happened.
Is it locked? It's not locked.
It's unlocked. Just looking at that room, you started realizing this looks like someone set it up. Boxes were tipped over, drawers were opened, but nothing appeared to have gone through.
That night, when police asked what was missing, Atif said two things: his Discman and a VCR.
Someone came in, murdered 3 people, and took his Walkman and a VCR. I mean, it makes no sense.
Detectives probed deeper. Who were these teenage boys who reported the crime?
The 1992-93 school year.
Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay had been best friends since high school.
What'd you like about high school?
I liked being a kid. I liked having free time, and I liked hanging around with other kids, and I just liked being young.
The boys shared a sarcastic sense of humor and an interest in reading and debate.
What would you guys talk about? What were you interested in?
You know, it was things like Shakespeare and philosophy and Camus and things like that.
They had a lot in common. They became very good friends because they were both precocious, they were both intelligent.
Sarah Isaacs is Sebastian's high school sweetheart.
He went to parties, he was athletic, and he became friends with Atif and sort of showed Atif how to dress. He'd introduced Atif to girls. He sort of helped Atif be a stud like he was.
That's going back a bit.
Sebastian was raised in a loving family with English roots.
There was a lot of respect in our household. I mean, you didn't talk back to my parents. You didn't swear in the house.
Sebastian's sister, Tiffany.
We both grew up playing classical cello, so we had music lessons and we had to practice every day after school.
All right, thanks.
In 2005, Tiffany was a TV reporter at the CBS station in Cleveland. She can't say enough about her little brother.
He's very smart. I mean, he's definitely what you would call an intellectual. And he's so well read. He's got so many fascinating things to say.
Sebastian became a member of the Royal Canadian Air Cadets and was given an award by Prince Edward. Atif made it to the Ivy League, attending Cornell University. It was the summer of their freshman year in college when the murders took place.
It sort of is like a jigsaw puzzle, where, you know, you just take that piece and you put it here and you start fitting it together, and pretty soon you get a picture.
Police took Sebastian and Atif to the station and examined them for traces of blood. They found nothing. When asked where they had been that evening, the boys provide a full account. At 8:30, they drove to a restaurant for a bite to eat. Then they went to a 9:50 showing of The Lion King.
Why do you remember them?
They were acting annoying, obnoxious.
Everywhere they went, the people who came into contact with them remembered them.
After the movie, they stopped at another restaurant and left the waitress a $6 tip on a $9 tab.
They don't usually do that, especially young guys. Young guys don't tip very well.
But something else troubled police. How could the boys remember so much detail about where they'd been that evening and yet not recall key moments at the murder scene? The police decided to interview Sebastian and Atif again, and detectives recorded the conversation.
I saw my mom. What did you do? I may have gone up to her. I can't remember. I don't know what I did. I can't remember.
Did you go walk over to your dad?
I don't think so. No.
Did you touch your dad?
I don't think so.
Well, you'd know, though, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I don't know if I know, but I don't think I touched him.
See, I don't understand this, Atif. Your sister is moaning. She's hurt.
Yes.
And you don't go and help her.
Detectives wanted to know why Atif didn't help his dying sister, even though he heard her through her bedroom door.
How hurt is she?
I didn't know.
Okay, you don't know how hurt she is.
I don't know how hurt she is. All I know is that I can't do anything.
Sebastian and Atif were witnesses. By the time they left at the end of these statements, were they suspects?
Yes, definitely suspects. By the time they left, they were suspects.
You know what, I think you know who it is. It's ridiculous. No, it's
I
not.
would tell you. I would tell you if I knew who did it.
And investigators thought they not only knew who, they also knew why.
$300,000 to $400,000 is about to slip through his fingers if she lives.
Are you saying Atif didn't go to the aid of his sister because he didn't want to save his sister?
Atif didn't go to the aid of his sister because unless she died, the whole plan came crumbling down on them.
3 days after the murders, relatives gathered in Bellevue to bury the Rafays in a traditional Muslim ceremony. But the only surviving member of the immediate family was nowhere to be found.
They were wondering, where's Atif? Where's the son?
On the day of the funeral, the Rafay's only son was on a bus headed across the border to Canada. And with him was his best friend, Sebastian Burns. Sebastian and Atif were now in Vancouver, Canada, out of reach of the Bellevue police and an investigation that targeted them for the murders of the Rafay family. Did the boys go to Vancouver or did they flee to Vancouver?
From our perspective, they fled back to Vancouver.
He didn't flee. He went home.
Their sudden bus trip across the border only raised more suspicion, even though both boys were Canadian citizens.
Well, how do you flee a country getting on a Greyhound bus?
In fact, a representative from the Canadian consulate informed the Bellevue police of their trip in advance.
She contacted the Bellevue Police Department to say these guys are leaving, they're going home, if that's okay with you.
She was told, quote, sure. Mm-hmm. She then tells the boys it's okay to go, and they leave. That is not fleeing.
It is not fleeing? I think it's
to
fleeing.
Ask permission?
Atif and Sebastian both had my numbers. They knew I was even in the process of getting them a pager so we could keep in contact. And they're gone. They don't tell me where they're at. They know I'm investigating the murders of their parents, and they're gone.
Detective Thompson was a veteran cop.
This is the other.
His gut told him that the boys were guilty, but he just didn't have the evidence to prove it. Investigators kept combing the house.
Is it locked? It's not locked.
They found no forced entry. There was, however, an eerie clue. A forensic tool, luminol, showed blood on the shower walls. The killer had used the shower before leaving.
The person was so comfortable and calm and collected that he or she might then decide perhaps they'll have a shower before they go. It is inconceivable.
Could that be the reason why the boys who had discovered the bodies at that bloody crime scene didn't have a trace of blood on their hair, their hands, or anywhere on their bodies?
Are you a killer, Sebastian?
No, absolutely not.
Did you hold that bat in your hands and kill those 3 people?
No, I didn't.
You're not lying to me.
No.
Would you have ever done anything, Atif, to hurt your parents?
No. The single most distressing thing about this entire experience is the fact that I would even have to speak out and say, yeah, no, I did not do that.
Okay, right here. Even without physical evidence, detectives were determined. They began to build a case against the boys based on their odd behavior following the murders.
They cooperated, they did everything that was asked of them. However, when they did things, they had this air or this attitude about doing it.
They honed in on their demeanor at the crime scene and questioned why they sat in front of the house if they believed an intruder might still be there.
He's out on the curb, 20 yards away from the front door where this supposed killer may be in the house, and he's waiting for the police on the curb while Atif's having a cigarette.
I'm not sure that anything that we did made any sense. I was not thinking in a normal way.
Police also couldn't make sense of why Atif would notice that his Discman and VCR were missing.
He's walking around the house claiming to discover the fact that the VCR is missing. And ultimately, while his mother and father and sister lay in a state of carnage. Let's not mince words here. It is carnage. He claims to have discovered that the Walkman was missing from his bedroom.
And they've decided that my son and his friend are the guilty parties. They've decided that.
I believe him to be totally innocent, as is Atif, and they have been damned.
Sebastian's family and friends rallied around him and Atif.
I remember sitting on those steps with Sebastian. I remember sitting on that field.
Sebastian's former girlfriend, Sarah Isaacs, says she knows his character better than anyone.
Have you ever thought to yourself, maybe there was something I missed about Sebastian that I just didn't see?
There's nothing that anyone could tell me. There's never a moment when someone could tell me something that made me think, honestly, maybe he did it. I never had to face that moment, ever. I know Sebastian. He was and is my very, very good friend.
Did the cops investigating this just need to get home to dinner? I mean, why didn't they follow up the leads that came their way?
And there were other compelling leads. Within days of the crime, police received a tip from a reliable informant that someone had offered $20,000 to kill an East Indian family that had recently moved from Vancouver to Bellevue.
There's no physical evidence that links Atif and Sebastian to the crime. Their alibis check out. And now you get this lead from an informant in Canada that somebody had been bragging about a hit on an East Indian family in Bellevue, Washington. Tells me that's the direction now you should be focusing your investigation, since there's no evidence against these boys.
Well, there is evidence against those boys. There was a lot of evidence against those boys, and it was all circumstantial. It wasn't evidence to convict them, certainly.
Is it fair to say that you didn't properly check out this lead in Vancouver?
It may be fair to say that that lead was not fully checked out. You get all kinds of tips that come in, and you have to weigh them, but the leads didn't go that direction. The leads went directly to Canada, and we followed those leads to Sebastian and Atif.
Atif, why don't you talk to police?
But on the advice of a lawyer, the boys decided to stop cooperating with Bellevue authorities.
The minute we went to Canada, Burns and Rafay wouldn't talk to us at all. They were telling other people not to talk to us.
So Thompson kept digging and found what he thought was a disturbing clue from their past.
We started looking through their high school yearbook, and Sebastian Burns was in a high school play called The Rope, about two kids who commit the perfect murder.
These are words that Sebastian's character said on stage. Do you mind reading it?
An immaculate murder. I have killed. I have killed for the sake of danger and for the sake of killing.
Ariana McGregor performed in the West Vancouver High School production of Rope, along with Sebastian.
The character in the play is somebody who's arrogant and believes he's better than everybody else. And Sebastian had a quality of being superior. He knew he was intelligent, knew he was good looking.
What was Rope about?
The gimmick of the play is that somebody is murdered at the start of the play, and the villains put him into a box, and then they invite guests over. Everybody's at this party wondering when the last guest is going to show up, and nobody knows that actually he's in the box at the front of the play. And so there's lots of suspenseful giggles all the way through, because everybody in the audience knows that there's this person, this thing in the box.
These black and white ethical balls.
Your character on stage says, "We've always said, you and I, that moral concepts of right and wrong don't hold for the intellectually superior. The only crime we can commit is a mistake." There's some people who believe those are words that the real Sebastian Burns might say.
Well, that's ridiculous. There was no time ever during any performance or any rehearsal that anybody was ever thinking anything serious about any of the supposed intellectual philosophies in this play or anything like that.
But detectives believed the fictional murder story did inspire the real-life crime. Even more chilling, the weapon was the same, a baseball bat.
Well, that's just a huge coincidence. I think Sebastian was actually mortified when he realized that he was a suspect in the baseball bat killings of the Rafays, because he said, "Cripes, what's going to happen when they find out about the play?"
How does the play end?
Their superior figures them out. Someone who is actually more intelligent than they are figures it out, and they get caught.
As the investigation continued in Bellevue, the boys were living well in Vancouver. With some of the money Atif inherited from his parents' estate, they bought a convertible and rented an apartment together with another high school pal,
I think I'll stay here forever.
Jimmy Miyoshi. Behind drawn curtains, they hid from the media, who were constantly in pursuit of them and their story.
Hello, is Atif there?
987.
But while they weren't talking to the police were listening to them.
Hello?
Atif Rafay?
Oh, yeah.
Every word they spoke at home or in their car was being recorded.
How are you doing?
Okay, I guess.
The boys had no idea they were now the targets of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP.
The RCMP applied for and ultimately obtained authorization to do wiretaps.
On April 10th, 1995, RCMP investigators intercepted this phone message.
This is Crimper's Hair Salon calling for Sebastian to confirm his appointment with Gregory tomorrow, Tuesday, April 11th.
Sebastian could never have imagined that he was about to fall into a trap set by one of the most sophisticated undercover operators in the world.
There was no doubt in my mind that yes, Sebastian Burns was responsible for this, and we were in fact going to get a full confession from him.
By April of 1995, Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay were Canada's most famous teenage murder suspects.
I remember a time when we were at a bus stop and someone drove by and rolled down the window and yelled, "Murderers!" That was typical. They were pariahs. They were hated.
I was unable to go to college. I was unable to get a job.
But the boys had a plan to make their fortune and live out a lifelong dream. They started work on their very own screenplay about two best friends accused of murdering a family.
the movie was going to be about Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay and the injustice that was heaped upon them as a result of the suspicion about their involvement in this triple aggravated murder case in Bellevue.
They called it the Great Despisers.
We were worried that it would sound a bit nerdy because having the word great in the title makes it sound kind of nerdy. And if we'd called it, for example, just the Despisers, that would have been more unimpeachably cruel. However, we decided to have the courage to stick with this nerdy title.
While the boys worked on what they say is their fictional story about two friends falsely accused, they had no idea the real-life plotline was about to take an astonishing turn.
This is Crimper's Hair Salon calling for Sebastian to confirm his appointment with Gregory.
That simple message from a local hair salon was the moment the RCMP was waiting for.
I think they were very vulnerable to whatever the RCMP had in store for them. These were kids who'd lived pretty sheltered lives.
When Sebastian was finished at Crimper's salon, a stranger was waiting.
And when Mr. Burns comes out of the salon, the undercover operator just approaches him, what they call the cold approach.
He seemed to me like some kind of an entrepreneur.
He walks up to him and says, "Hey buddy, can you give me a hand? I seem to have locked my keys in the car."
So he asked me for a ride to his hotel, and I gave him a ride.
The stranger took Sebastian to a bar and bought him a drink for his trouble.
I was impressed by that, and I was also sort of intrigued, I guess, or excited about the way that he seemed so ready to be interested in me.
Sebastian told his new friend that he and his buddies had written a screenplay, but he didn't have a job and needed financing. The friend said he knew someone who could help.
Ultimately, the goal was to get Sebastian to meet with the next guy up the chain. And it worked perfectly.
Sebastian thought he was about to meet a connected businessman, but it was this man. Sergeant Hazlitt of the RCMP. We cannot show you his face.
I don't think there's an undercover team like this anywhere in the world. And I say that very seriously.
The best of the best.
The best.
The RCMP spent months preparing to manipulate their target.
They had access to fancy cars, posh hotel suites, weapons, false international documents, beautiful women.
Posing as professional mobsters, the RCMP set up the first meeting with Sebastian at a strip club.
How important was this movie to Sebastian Burns?
It was just about his whole life.
The crime boss told Sebastian he did have cash to invest in his screenplay, but Sebastian would have to earn it. Sebastian had no idea he was being offered work in a make-believe world of crime. Jobs were also promised to Atif and their pal, Jimmy Miyoshi.
I hope these guys are solid, man. These guys are never going to betray me, ever, all right? Never.
Sebastian's first assignment, transport a stolen car for the crime boss.
He had nothing. And then he was offered something. He was offered something that was criminal, something that he probably wouldn't have thought was a good idea had he had something else going on in his life.
He was only paid $200 for the job, and he wasn't happy.
He was disgusted. He made it clear he wasn't happy. He told us he could make more money than that stealing his videos out of stores.
It was essential to the undercover operation that Sebastian continue working for the organization, so the next staged crime is easier, for more cash.
What I want you guys to do, which is no big deal. It's pretty straightforward.
Sebastian and Jimmy Miyoshi go from one bank to another, laundering money.
Cash is here, just take and deposit into this account when you guys run in the first time. Next time, you gotta go to a different bank.
This time, for a day's work, they get paid $2,000.
Wow, so cool. This has been the coolest thing ever. I've been operating anymore.
I couldn't help but be excited about having $2,000 put in my hand, and I'd hardly had to do anything for it.
Months go by. The undercover operators take Sebastian to posh hotels, trying to build trust and draw him out.
How's the movie going? Well, we haven't started filming or anything, but our script is, couldn't believe it. It's brilliant.
Did you sense that Sebastian felt he was smarter than you?
Oh, there's no doubt. He made it clear and told us that on more than one occasion.
Tell me how smart you are. Tell me how smart you are. I'm one of the most intelligent people in the world.
Slowly, the undercover operators bring up the investigation in Bellevue. Hazlitt tries to get Sebastian to confess by telling him he already knows what happened.
Well, I know you did it. You know you did it. The police know you did it. As far as I know, they're not.
Sebastian doesn't admit guilt, but he confides in the mobsters that if the police did find something to tie him to the crime, he might want them to destroy it. And he has a very practical theory. As one of the best-known murder suspects in Canada, he is confident that his movie would make millions if he is suddenly proven innocent.
And a film with that kind of promotion, because the things as it is right now, it's like, ooh, controversy, right? Which in itself promotes, right? But this is like, oh, you're heroes. Something goes up to 25, 30 million.
Taking their cue again from their target, the businessmen raise the stakes. They tell Sebastian that the Bellevue police have physical evidence tying him to the crime.
Well, I'll tell you, they're coming to lock your ass up. Yours and your friends.
To make it seem real, Hazlitt shows him this phony memo on Bellevue police letterhead detailing the evidence linking Sebastian to the murders.
Just read this piece of shit.
The mobsters offer to destroy the so-called evidence, but they need Sebastian to tell them exactly what happened in the Rafay house the night of the murders.
Well, I want your help. Yeah, you need my help. So, you tell me what went on down there, and I'm going to tell you how I'm going to take care of your problem.
Finally, on July 18, 1995, 1 year after the murders, Sebastian meets the crime boss, Sergeant Hazlitt, at the Ocean Point Resort. And the cameras are rolling.
He walks into this hotel room and takes off his shoes. He stretches out on a love seat. It's only then that Mr. Burns lets his guard down and the dirty little secret that he's been protecting for the last 12 or 13 months starts to unravel on video for the whole wide world to see.
It has taken 3 months of undercover work to get to this moment.
Well, your both guys are up one day and say, hey, let's go off your family and get all their money? Basically. Essentially, yeah, I mean.
And he told me the details how him and Atif Rafay did commit the murders in Bellevue.
How did you do 3 people at once? Not at once, just one after the other.
Extremely, extremely cold individual. It's phenomenal.
To you, man.
The next day, Sebastian brings Atif to the crime boss to tell his story.
How's it feel killing your parents and mucked off and sister?
Pretty rotten, but it's tempered by the fact that I felt that it was necessary.
Why?
It was necessary to, I guess, achieve what I wanted to achieve in this life.
That's all the police needed to hear.
Those were solid, strong confessions that only the individuals that were responsible for that murder would be able to sit down and tell it like it was.
Cheers.
Sebastian, Atif, and Jimmy Miyoshi are all arrested.
You have anything to say?
But this case is just beginning. Sebastian says he's lying, that undercover officers intimidated him into making a false confession.
I believe that if I'd crossed them, that they would have me killed.
Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay, best friends who once dreamed of making it big in movies, were now behind bars. But no sooner were Sebastian and Atif arrested than the same Canadian government that set a trap to catch them led an international battle to spare their lives.
We should not be sending anybody back.
The case went all the way up to Canada's Supreme Court.
Persons who leave the country and commit offenses outside of the country should expect that they will be punished under the laws of the jurisdiction in which they committed the crime.
Sending the boys back across the border to Washington meant they would face the death penalty if convicted. A punishment Canada had long since abolished and considered inhumane.
We never knew when we were going to be leaving for the United States.
And every time we heard, oh, there may be a trial, next year, then it became the next year.
And that lasted for about 4 years, where we thought that we were a week away from extradition.
After 6 years of legal wrangling, the King County prosecutor in Seattle agreed to Canada's demands not to seek the death penalty. Sebastian and Atif, now 25-year-old men, were finally extradited to face murder charges.
Mr. Rafay, you're charged. Mr. Burns, you're charged in the cause numbers that I just read with 3 counts of aggravated murder in the first degree.
If convicted, the penalty would now be life with no parole.
That goes with the motion to dismiss.
They were appointed a team of attorneys. Representing Sebastian was Teresa Olson, an ardent, if eccentric public defender who believed in the boy's innocence.
Of course they didn't do the killings. The evidence is clear that they didn't do the killings.
Olson worked tirelessly on the case, running down leads and witnesses. But in the summer of 2002, the case took a bizarre turn. Guards at the King County Jail reported seeing Olson having sex with Sebastian during an attorney-client meeting.
Shut up!
The well-publicized scandal even caught the attention of late-night comic Jay Leno.
A female lawyer in Seattle is in trouble for having sex in jail with her client, who is a murderer. How creepy is that? Huh? Sex with a lawyer. Ooh.
And brought the trial to a grinding halt.
This court had no choice but to appoint new counsel.
Sebastian's new attorneys were a dream team. Ivy League-trained Jeff Robinson and Song Richardson.
There is a lot at stake for Sebastian Burns, and we will be fighting till the end.
187's a retired artist.
They were among Seattle's best and most expensive criminal defense lawyers.
Exactly.
Along with Amanda Lee, they staunchly believed in the boy's innocence and agreed to take the high-profile case at a public defender's wage.
They have been essentially judged and treated as though they were guilty from the beginning when the evidence just isn't there.
What kind of pressure is on all of your shoulders as we approach this trial?
Nothing more or less than the rest of Sebastian Burns' natural life.
They were up against 2 of the most seasoned and respected prosecutors in Seattle.
I want to talk.
We're going to get in. Let's sit up.
Roger Davidheiser would be joining James Conant on the case.
It's not just justice, it's the truth. What we're after here is the truth. And I would submit to you that's what separates our side from theirs.
By September 2003, Sebastian and Atif had been in jail for more than 8 years, charged but never convicted for the Rafay family murders.
You have to recognize that these are human beings, and they have had their lives stolen from them. And to make it worse, they've had their lives stolen from them to somehow resolve a murder that they didn't commit.
The case would turn on those controversial confessions.
Make-believe mobsters extracting confessions from teenagers. Is that allowed in the state of Washington?
It's not allowed in the state of Washington, and I don't think it's allowed anywhere else in the United States under the circumstances that it was done in this case.
Are you comfortable using the results from an illegal undercover investigation by U.S. laws in your case?
This investigation was not illegal because it was conducted in Canada by Canadian authorities targeting Canadian citizens. It was an investigation that they undertook separate and apart from the Bellevue investigation.
This case, it's not only about the lives of my two friends. It's about the responsibility of police and prosecutors to do their job properly and to act in good faith. And they have not done that in this case.
It would be up to Superior Court Judge Charles Mertel,
well, please be seated, everyone,
to decide if Sebastian and Atif's chilling confessions caught on tape would be allowed to damn them in an American court.
Other prosecutors in other cases with evidence just like that have told jurors, just like the ones that will sit in our case, that it's a slam dunk. And those jurors very comfortably have convicted people and sentenced them to die. And they've been wrong.
Judge Mertel was about to make the most controversial ruling of his career. The boys' lives would depend on what he was about to say.
48 Hours continues.
Before we begin, just a trigger warning. The following episode contains references to graphic physical violence. Please listen with care.
Let's be honest, you've been portrayed as a monster.
Yes.
Evil, maniacal, plotting, a murderer. Are you those things?
No.
Welcome to Killer Conversation, a podcast about the criminal mind. My name is Judy Ryback, and I'm a longtime 48 Hours producer, so I like to think I know a thing or three about killers. In this episode, Peter Van Sant and I will take a deep dive into 2 interviews he did with convicted killers, teenagers who murdered 3 people for money and the thrill of it back in 1994. A decade later, they agreed to be interviewed exclusively by Peter for 48 hours.
Did you hold that bat in your hands and kill those 3 people?
No, I didn't.
Sebastian Burns has been described as the mastermind who used a metal baseball bat to kill his buddy Atif Rafay's mother, father, and sister while Atif stood by.
Atif, did you and Sebastian Burns meticulously plan the murder of your family?
Absolutely not.
Hi, Peter. Good to see you again. Thanks so much for joining me. So this was such a high-profile case. You covered it twice for 48 Hours and wrote a book about it. Tell us how you got involved.
Sometimes it's the simplest of ways. The house where this occurred was about 1.5 miles from the house where I grew up in. This was in Bellevue, Washington. And a great source that I'd used over the years, my mother, called to tell me about it. And I immediately did everything I could to try to land this assignment. So from the very beginning, I had really kind of a personal stake in this.
I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to hear you say it. What was it about this case?
Oh, man, this story had everything. You've got 2 best friends. They're young. They're meticulous plotters. Vicious, heartless characters that some fiction writer could not have come up with. The 2 of them met in high school in Vancouver, Canada, and in all the years I had lived in Bellevue, there had never been an unsolved murder case.
So both of these boys were Canadian citizens at the time, right? I mean, the Rafays were living in Washington, but they were Canadians. So this case drew international attention, and yet you were the only journalist who Sebastian and Atif agreed to interview with. How did you get that interview? Why 48 hours?
Well, first, 48 does have a great reputation of honestly telling these stories and wanting to hear from both sides and respecting the whole process. But it has to go back to my producers on this one, Jenna Jackson, Guyan Kashishian, and Nancy Kramer, who dedicated their lives this 6-month-long trial. We had someone there virtually every day. And so they met the defense attorneys, they developed relationships, they met Sebastian's parents, and Atif's, of course, were dead. And they developed some trust. And as a Seattleite, that connected with a lot of people. I grew up there. I knew the area. I knew Vancouver, Canada really well. And I think all of that came together and we managed to land the interviews.
Amazing. I know what that's like to sit through long trials and gain everyone's trust. So they are both remorseless killers, but so different. Sebastian seems diabolical. Atif is so aloof. How did you prepare for two very different interviews?
Well, in both cases, we had the ability to dig into these police reports. We watched the undercover videos, which were haunting. We interviewed investigators, prosecutors, defense attorneys. They all were very open with sharing information with us, and I can't thank them enough. Sebastian was cocky and condescending, and people said he was the mastermind, and he just would look at you and couldn't help it but look down upon you. Even though he's wearing an orange jumpsuit, even though he's the one behind bars, I was the fool in the room, I felt, when I was talking to him. And I knew I had to be direct and really well prepared because he would correct me on any fact.
Yeah.
Atif was his devoted follower. He was a very soft-spoken intellectual who, if you believe what investigators have concluded in this case, he stood by while his best friend in the world savagely beat his family to death with a baseball bat. So I honestly didn't know what to expect with him, because when you first greet him, he's very well-mannered. But as you get into a conversation, he loves to turn it into verbal combat, and he wants to impress you with his array of weapons with the English language. And so it's fascinating to sit with him, and he found that to be almost a contest, a debate in a way that in his mind, he could never lose.
You talked to them separately in the jail where they were awaiting sentencing. Tell me about that day.
It was so weird. It was a vibe that I have never encountered in any other interview with a killer. Arrogance just filled the air, no remorse, not taking any responsibility for these horrors. Occasionally they would smile in a way that was exasperating. I mean, I even said at one time in the interview to Sebastian, what do you think, this is funny? Because he'd have a smile on his face. And so in that way, it's a real out-of-body experience for me as a journalist.
Did you ever think to yourself that because of your superior intelligence, the rules of society did not apply to you?
No, and I really didn't sincerely think in those terms at all. As you put it, my superior intelligence. Like I said, I used to make a lot of wisecracks, and no, I didn't think like that.
How would you describe Sebastian in a word?
I have to use words, unfortunately, but handsome, charming when he chose to be, smart, someone who could have accomplished great things in life. Sebastian, he became a member of the Royal Canadian Air Cadets. Mm. And there's this picture of him getting an award by Prince Edward, and his parents were so proud. He expected to be a lawyer in life, he said, because he loved to be so argumentative. He was raised in a really great home, a very sophisticated upper middle class family. Mom and dad were very well educated. They lived in West Vancouver, British Columbia. It was a very, very desirable neighborhood. It was a place where Sebastian and his sister Tiffany they'd wake up the parents in the morning on Christmas morning playing their cellos, a Christmas song to wake them up. Sister Tiffany was a real successful woman in her own right. She was a television reporter and anchor at the CBS station in Cleveland and working her way up in a very promising career.
How would you describe Atif in a word?
Compliant. That's the way he was with Sebastian.
Atif had been accepted at Cornell University, which is currently ranked number 11 in the country by U.S. News and World Report. He was impressive, and he knew it.
And I know you've heard this many times, but the notion is two arrogant, smug, self-absorbed young men who saw themselves as intellectually superior planned the perfect murder so that you could financially benefit from it and achieve the things, in your own words, that you wanted to achieve in life.
Yeah, I know. It's such a compelling tabloid narrative, but like many tabloid narratives, it's fatuous and foolish and false. And it's that particular line about achieving the things that I want to do in life. I think that if any discerning person looks at that, they will see the empty abstractions of someone who is trying to come up with some kind of justification for something that he didn't do and couldn't justify.
My goodness, his smugness is palpable, and he has a smile on his face the whole time. What made these two friends, Peter?
I guess there's similarities in intellect, but they're the odd couple. One was the leader, one was the follower. They were both quirky. They gravitated toward each other in high school. Both were fans of the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who was Hitler's favorite philosopher, by the way. Nietzsche had this theory of Übermensch, the Superman who could impose his own morality, his own will upon the weak through strength and dominance. I think they saw themselves as Supermen.
Were there any signs when they were in high school that either of them might be capable of a crime like this?
Yeah, when we were doing interviews in Vancouver, there was a woman we spoke to who was a good friend of Sebastian's, in fact, a girlfriend. And she told authorities that Sebastian had told her that he wanted to know what it was like to kill someone.
Are you saying that you are incapable of committing murder?
Yes, absolutely.
You are. Then how do you explain what you said to your friend Nazgul Shifty 6 months before these murders? I'd like to kill somebody someday. I think I'd like to know what it feels like. I think I might find it rather enjoyable.
That was a sarcasm that I made. First of all, I want to be clear. That's not a verbatim quote. Nobody knows what the verbatim quote is. That was a sarcasm that was made at some point when I was 17 years old. I was reminded of it for the first time just this last March, okay?
Why would he even say a thing like that? Like, who says a thing like that? What, was he testing her?
Yeah, well, look, this girlfriend, that quote was burned into her mind. She was very bright, and I think that was maybe a word or two off. But note the analysis he has to give us about it's not exactly verbatim, but she was absolutely certain this what he said, and it also sent a chill up her spine. But also as an Übermensch, he could say and do whatever he wanted to. And get this, in the high school yearbook, Sebastian had described himself as a titan with furious contempt for the petty strictures of plebeians. And Atif wrote, "Hearing the cries of the plebs below, Atif descended through the clouds and gazed bemusedly at the petty struggles of those around him and laughed." This, again, brilliant immaturity, wordplay, used for shock.
Okay, let's talk about the murders. According to authorities, sometime in the late evening of July 12th, 1994, Sebastian used a metal baseball bat to bludgeon Atif's parents and his sister, while Atif basically stood by. He may even have been watching at some points. You've seen a lot of crime scene photos, Peter. We both have. How do you think these compare?
These crime scene pictures were among the most gruesome I had ever seen, particularly Atif's father. The first picture I saw was of Sultana Rafay, Atif's mother. Who would have known that Sultana at that time of day would have been down unpacking boxes because they had moved into this new house? Well, Atif would know that. And it's believed that she was attacked first. Her head was crushed from behind. She probably had no idea that this killer was approaching her. She's lying on her stomach. Fascinating that her head was covered in a scarf. And investigators will tell you that when a killer knows the victim, and particularly if it's someone close to them, that they often cover the head because they just don't want to look at the face.
Right.
And so we move on then upstairs. The killer then moved upstairs, and Tariq, Atif's father, 56 years old at the time, he was sleeping on his back. And his head was pulverized by several dozen blows at least, investigators believe. And this was as savage a rage killing as I have ever seen. The third one was Basma. She's 20 years old. Why would they save Basma for last? Well, she couldn't talk. And she was autistic. And the killer entered her room. And this turned into a bit of a struggle because she was physically strong and she was running and trying to get away and was being hit. And one neighbor heard, and this is so disturbing, what he described as a mooing sound coming from inside the Rafay house. And we know today, and investigators believe, that noise was Basma crying out as she fought for her life. When investigators got into the room, they noticed she had defensive wounds all over her hands. Her skull had been smashed in and many of her teeth had been knocked out. So this was a terrifying, horrible, drawn-out death for Basma.
So incredibly brutal. I mean, one of the detectives said somebody went off the deep end and once they started killing, either enjoyed it or couldn't stop themselves. Two neighbors even heard the pounding of the bat.
Yeah, one thought they must be putting up big paintings because they were having to hit the wall so hard.
Why would Sebastian be so brutal about these killings?
This is something that I don't really have the answer for this one. People have often wondered, and the investigators did on this, considering what Sebastian had talked about killing and wondering what it was like, that this was a thrill kill.
Right.
We know that Sebastian had starred in a high school play called Rope, which was turned into a movie.
One of my favorite films.
Mine too, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. The play and his film are about two young friends, much like Sebastian and Atif, who strangle a friend with a rope for the thrill of it.
Right, to see what it's like,
and
right?
So there's similarities between what he acted out on stage and what was occurring in that house.
Okay, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about why prosecutors think Sebastian and Atif committed these horrible murders. The answer is chilling on so many levels. The senior deputy prosecutor on the case against Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay called the murders absolutely savage. What reason did they have to commit these gruesome murders?
Well, we know Sebastian had expressed an interest in killing someone someday to see what it felt like. And in this case, Atif's parents had some money and they had life insurance as well. And I think money did play a role in this. And Atif had this difficult relationship with his father, who was deeply religious. And he'd also expressed kind of a resentment of his autistic sister Basma, he called her gross and said he never really liked her. And prosecutors said that he would mock and he would mimic her in front of her. So money, that to me, I think is at the heart of this.
I think you're right.
And with Atif saying at one point that he wanted to be able to live the life he wanted to live, and the money would allow him to do that.
Right. You asked Atif about his relationship with his family, and his answer left me cold.
How would you describe your relationship with your parents?
I was closer to my mom than probably anyone I ever have been or will ever be close to. I loved both my parents. I admired my father. At the same time, we had all kinds of arguments, which I enjoyed having and which I suspect they enjoyed having as well. We had, it's hard to sum up the relationship that a person has with one's parents because it's, in one sense, the closest and most basic sort of relationship that you will ever have. It constitutes who you are as a human being. Did
you love your mom and dad?
Yes.
Did you love your sister?
I would have to say that I didn't really have a relationship with my sister. And so I think that if I were to say that I loved my sister, I would sort of be demeaning the feelings that I had for my parents.
That is so strange. And he was very honest about not loving his sister. What were you thinking in that moment?
It's just a coldness that if you dehumanize, it's easier to kill.
Okay, so these murders were very well thought out, clearly not well enough to keep them out of prison, but there was a lot of planning that went into these murders. What was the plan?
The idea was to be out for the evening in a very noticeable way, because they went to a restaurant called The Keg. And by the way, Keg is, 5 miles from where I grew up. I went there while I was covering this case just to have dinner there and see the place. And that's in Factoria, Washington, which is right off the interstate near Bellevue. That's where the movie complex was, where they went to see The Lion King. And a waiter would later tell police that he remembered the 2 underage Canadians trying to order wine. So they did something that would draw attention, where they'd have to show ID, right? And then when they get to the movie theater, when Sebastian was buying his movie tickets, he goes, "Hey, you like my shirt?" And his shirt had a big cartoon character, some milkman character on it. And the ticket taker remembered Sebastian. Yeah, this odd guy said, "Hey, take a look at my T-shirt." Again, he's registering in people's minds. He's creating a memory that he was there. And Atif was wearing an army jacket. Once inside the movie theater, people said that they were obnoxious. They were drawing attention to themselves. They were talking loudly. At one point, one of them went up to the screen and tried to pull the movie curtains apart. Again, get everyone's attention. Yeah, I remember those guys. I saw them there. Then after they snuck out, they committed the crimes. Investigators believe that after the murder, the boys went out on this tour of eateries to try to draw attention to themselves as much as they could, so people would remember them if investigators came to question employees. And their first stop was a diner where they paid with a $10 bill for basically about a $3 meal and leaving a $7 tip. And the waitress remembered them. And they end up also then going out to a nightclub that was closing at 2 a.m. and they demanded to be let in, but they were not. Again, people would remember, yeah, those 2 boys, they were shouting at us, let us into the club. Everywhere they went, they wanted to create a memory with an employee that if authorities came, and remember, over and over, the police questioned the neighbors in the hopes that they would change their timelines, because for investigators, this was a big problem. On one side of the Rafay house, there was a woman named Julie, and she was a very meticulous woman who every night went through a routine that began at a certain time where, as I recall, she put in a load of wash and then put it in the dryer. And then she would read for a particular amount of time, usually even the same amount of pages each night. And she would look at her clock, and she would go to bed at exactly the same time. And based on her story, the boys were at that movie theater at the time that she was an ear witness to the murders inside the Rafay house. When she heard all of this noise coming from there, the boys weren't there. They were at the movie theater, and that is not disputed.
So she heard pounding at a time when those boys were allegedly spotted at the movie theater.
Yeah, this is before any of the encounters with the waitresses and everything else.
Right.
She never changed her timeline, but investigators just simply said, well, we're going to say, and we'll say in court, that we just think she's wrong. She just had her times wrong, even though she won't change them, that she was wrong. But it created an opening for the defense.
And there was another neighbor who heard it and believed it was also at the same time. So Sebastian and Atif claimed they entered the Rafay family home at around 2 a.m. and that Sebastian was the first to see Atif's mother lying in a pool of blood. They admit that they never touched her. They didn't even bother to see if she was still alive or try to help her.
How do you know she's still not breathing? How do you not turn her over to check if she's breathing? To see if there's something you could do?
I don't know. And I don't know. And maybe that was a really cowardly thing to do. It was just a reflex. I cannot describe to you how shocking it was. Just how completely confounding it was. And there was nothing sensical about my reaction at all.
It's been alleged you didn't want to touch the body because you didn't want to get blood on you. Because that would wreck your alibi. It would wreck the stage that you had set there to fool police.
That's completely wrong.
I mean, if you're not the killer, you're trying to save that person, right? You don't care if you get blood on you.
Right, absolutely.
During the investigation, Sebastian was caught on tape saying that he was naked when he committed the murders. What's that all about?
Well, think about it. If you're wearing clothes, you're going to get blood spatter on those clothing, and that can turn into evidence. And investigators concluded fairly early on, this is just one of the bizarre things, never heard of this before in any murder case I've covered, that the killer stepped into the shower and took a shower. And what did investigators find in that shower stall? On the drain, there were 21 hairs recovered, and they were all from Sebastian Burns. And the walls of the shower had blood on them. It was tested, and that was Tariq Rafay's, Atif's dad. But what killer would step in to take a shower, particularly if it was a stranger, because that killer would have known, Atif's not here. He could come home.
Right.
I better get out of this house as quickly as possible.
Good point.
What killer would step in to take a shower if that killer didn't know there wasn't anyone left to come home?
Right.
If because Atif was there, he was alive.
Atif was already there,
and he was
right.
one of the two killers.
So they discover Atif's mother, and then Sebastian calls 911. When the police arrived, Atif's sister, Basma, was still alive. They could hear her moaning. The boys would have heard her too, and you asked them why they didn't try to save Basma's life. Let's listen to Atif.
Your sister was in the other room. You knew she was injured. You could hear her moaning. How do you not go in and give first aid? You could have saved your sister's life.
Well, for one, I don't really know first aid, and I didn't even think of it.
You're a bright guy. If someone's bleeding, you know how to stop bleeding, right?
You're right.
You know that for the average person, it sounds terrible that you didn't go in there. It sounds like you wanted her to die.
Well, I suppose that if I had planned these murders, I would certainly have rushed in and made heroic efforts to save her. Unfortunately, I had not planned these murders. I didn't commit these murders, and Sebastian didn't either. And I acted in a cowardly and shameful way, which I felt ashamed of even in the days immediately following, and have never since ceased feeling shameful of. But those were my reactions under pressure, I guess.
Oh, Peter, where to start? It was a decision. It wasn't a decision. If he had planned the murders, but unfortunately he didn't plan the murders, is this a confession of sorts?
I'm not quite sure. I mean, so in other words, yeah, he planned it. Sebastian did. I would have done a much better job. It's stupid. That answer is so clumsy and so void of humanity.
Okay, so Peter, police focused on the boys from the very beginning. Why?
Well, let's go down the list. They discovered the bodies. The murders didn't look like a robbery gone bad. They both talked about there must have been a break-in. There were no signs of any forced entry at the house. There was an overkill situation. No burglar would do something like that. And cops became even more suspicious when the night after the murder, Sebastian and Atif were spotted at a local video store renting movies. They didn't seem at all fazed by the gruesome murder scene they had discovered. And police were also struck by how many details they remembered about their night out on the town. Remember all the waitresses and all the things. But they couldn't recall what they did when they got home and found Atif's family beaten to death.
Yeah, they weren't exactly acting like teenagers who were in a state of shock. So let's talk about the defense for a minute. The boys and their defense team believed that Atif's father was assassinated and that his wife and daughter were collateral damage. What can you tell us about that?
Well, Atif's father, Tariq, he was prominent and active in the local Muslim community, and he offended more conservative Muslims. And how is that? Well, as an engineer, Tariq Rafay, he calculated true east and determined that all the mosques in the Pacific Northwest and British Columbia, Canada, were not properly facing Mecca. And Muslims must pray toward Mecca. And this is crucial. And so he said everyone was going to have to move their prayer mats 1 degree. Doesn't sound like a big deal, but for some, this could be blasphemous. This could be, how dare you? You're telling us that we've been praying in the wrong direction. And Bellevue police ended up getting 3 tips that the murders may have been related to fundamentalists who wanted Tariq and his family dead. A Canadian officer told them that an informant had warned him that there was a hit out on an East Indian family in Bellevue. Now, the Rafay family, they're not East Indians. They're from Pakistan. But still, the context and the nature of that tip is strongly suggesting that they could have been the targets.
Right. Also, the Seattle Police Intelligence Division reported that they believed the family may have been killed by an extremist group called Al-Fuqra. And an FBI informant told them that he knew an imam who ordered the murders and knew a man who said he committed the murders. He said he even saw a baseball bat in the trunk of his car and believed that was the murder weapon. The cops hadn't even publicized that the weapon was a metal baseball bat yet.
I mean, all this is just so intriguing.
It seems like the Bellevue police kind of blew that all off. Do you think it's possible that they just didn't pay attention to that at all?
I believe with all that has happened in the world, this would be checked out. And at the time, I think it wasn't properly checked out.
On the day that Atif Rafay's parents and his sister were laid to rest, Atif was nowhere to be found. He and his buddy Sebastian Burns were on a bus on their way to Sebastian's home in Vancouver, Canada.
My dad was very worried about what the Bellevue police were doing. He'd called a friend of his who was a lawyer. He told his friend some of the things that the police had been saying to him. And it was pretty clear that the police were treating us as suspects. His friend, who was a lawyer, said, if it was my kid, I'd drive down there tonight and pick him up myself. My dad asked me, did I want him to come and drive down that night and pick him up myself after he told me that. And I told him, no, it's okay, we'll catch a bus back the next day. But he was very concerned that we come back to Canada as soon as possible.
How did the Bellevue police feel about their prime suspects fleeing the country?
This is a part of the story that really drives me freaking crazy. They didn't have any basis to continue holding them. They'd been interviewed numerous times. And the truth is, they didn't flee. These boys didn't flee. A representative from the Canadian consulate informed the Bellevue police of their plans that the boys would be picked up by their father and taken back to Vancouver, British Columbia. And they said, is that all right? And they were told, yes, it's all right. She then tells the boys, this consulate officer tells the boys it's okay to go, and they leave. That is many things in this world, but that is not fleeing.
But the media reported it as them fleeing, which did not make them look good. So there wasn't enough evidence to hold them. When they got to Canada, did Sebastian's family believe that the boys were innocent?
Oh, absolutely, they believed. This was an impossibility that this could have happened. They believed they were innocent, and they were just being set upon by a police department in a wealthy community that was under enormous pressure to solve this case.
But again, the boys didn't really help themselves at all. They behaved very badly. They used money from the Rafay family estate to rent and then buy a Mustang convertible and go on a road trip.
Yeah, and there was a memorial service for the Rafay family in Vancouver. It was covered by media from around the world, and the boys were there, and they decided to, when they came out of the mosque, to run to a car, and they were laughing and covering up their faces, and it was just a shocking, shocking moment.
What was so funny, Atif?
I guess, it was the media that was funny. And it was the sheer grotesqueness of, these were people who were literally chasing me down to ask me, why won't you cooperate with the police? I guess the sheer gall, I suppose, of being chased down at a memorial service and asked questions by reporters who really cared nothing, I suspect, for my family, for the murders, for anything but getting a rise, essentially, out of me. It just seemed absolutely grotesque, and I suppose I couldn't help laughing at it.
When I watched the clips of that memorial service, it looked to me like Sebastian gave the finger to one of the camera crews, and they looked like rock stars walking into some venue. It was just bizarre. But, what's interesting is to some people, they actually looked like traumatized teenagers. Some people believe that if they were trying to get away with murder, they would have been crying and acting, upset and weeping at the grave sites, not acting like the idiots that they were acting like. Do you think they were in shock?
Well, there was a behavioral expert who was ready to testify for the defense, but this man was never called. And he said that this goofy, bizarre behavior is actually common in extremely traumatic events with boys whose brains aren't yet fully formed, that you'll get that kind of behavior.
So no matter what people believed about these boys, they became clearly notorious. It seems like everybody knew who they were and what they were suspected of doing.
Sebastian testified that he now is almost like the best, he and Atif were the best known men in British Columbia because of all the media coverage. He couldn't get a job and he couldn't go back to college. And Atif couldn't get back to school due to the attention of this case. So they rent a house in Vancouver with two high school friends, including a close friend who ends up playing an important role in this case, Jimmy Miyoshi. And they would play loud music all night long. People would call the RCMP,
the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Yeah, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And the RCMP at this point decides, let's open up our own investigation.
Right. And so they decide to bug the house that the boys were living in. They also bugged Sebastian's cell phone. And Yeah, and they realized that they were smart boys and that they had to be smarter than the boys. So they used what was called in Canada at that point, the Mr. Big operation.
Detective Bob Thompson told us you had committed the perfect murder. There was no evidence at the house linking you to this crime. And if you hadn't gone back to Canada and gotten involved in this undercover operation, you never would have been arrested. Do you think about that?
Oh, I think about that often.
And that sting operation would prove to be the boys' undoing. That's next time on Killer Conversation. 48 Hours Killer Conversation is hosted and produced by me, Judy Ryback. Our story editor is Maura Walls. Alan Pang oversees recording, mixing, and sound design, fact-checking, and additional production support from Rebecca LaFlamme, and special thanks to 48 Hours executive producer Judy Tygard and Paramount Podcast Vice President Megan Marcus. Follow and listen to Killer Conversation on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. If you liked this episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Follow Killer Conversation on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
"48 Hours" continues.
I think that everyone who knew Sebastian thought that he was going on to do something interesting with his life. Yeah, people expected him to be a leader, to do something interesting, and I hope one day he will.
Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay should have been celebrating at the West Vancouver High School 10-year reunion. Instead, they had become the class of '93's most infamous graduates. Prosecutors say just 1 year out of high school, these brilliant best friends tried to commit the perfect murder. It was a brutal crime.
There's blood all over his face.
That shocked the upscale suburb of Bellevue, Washington. Atif's mother, father, and sister bludgeoned to death. The motive, insurance money. The boys got away and were living in Canada until undercover police officers caught them on tape boasting about how they did it.
How did you do 3 people at once? Not at once.
Now, on the eve of their murder trial, a judge would decide if a jury would get to hear those chilling confessions.
I do not find the undercover officers' conduct in this case shocking or outrageous, although they were deceitful, persistent, and aggressive. They engaged in tricks, but not dirty tricks.
It was a controversial ruling allowing the boys' own words to be used against them.
What did you do first? The mother.
And would set the tone for the whole trial.
Just how powerful is the impact of this video of these 2 boys confessing to murders?
It's incredibly powerful. When I first saw it, I was taken aback. I was shocked. There are 2 young men seemingly laughing about slaughtering 3 people and saying, "I did it."
And while the confessions may be shocking, the defense says they're not true.
This case is about what happens when a presumption of guilt, when a gut feeling that you have the right suspects takes over from logical and objective evaluation of the evidence. This case is about what happens when you pursue individuals as opposed to pursuing the truth.
Finally, in November 2003, more than 9 years after the Rafay family murders, Sebastian and Atif get their day in court.
The jury's going to finally hear the story of what really happened to the Rafay family, and they'll hear the story of Sebastian and Atif's innocence.
But prosecutors had a very different story to tell.
Sebastian Burns is young, Thoughtful, charismatic, manipulative, and most importantly, a killer. A brutal killer.
You've been portrayed as a monster.
Yeah, yes.
Maniacal, plotting, a murderer. Are you those things?
No.
The state's theory is we want to make the jurors hate these two young men. Essentially, they make it a test of character as opposed to a test of evidence.
And character is at the heart of the prosecution's case.
All rise. Superior Court is now in session.
The defendants were two young men who believed they could commit the perfect murder.
Roger David Heiser opened for the state.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you will hear in the end is that it was this very hubris that sealed their fate, and their arrogant and unrealistic belief that they were smart enough to achieve mastery over the police and their investigation.
He zeroed in on the piece of evidence that launched the case, and for the first time revealed a startling flaw in the boys' plan.
I need an ambulance.
They made that 911 call too quickly.
We think they're dead.
My belief is that they just walked straight into the house and made the 911 call.
The timing was critical, so we asked Detective Thompson to retrace their drive home from downtown Seattle, where they were last seen that night.
18 minutes.
What does that tell you?
And 18 minutes would give them 3 minutes in the house.
And 3 minutes, said the prosecutors, was not enough time in the house to find the bodies and do all the things Sebastian and Atif told the police they did.
And think about what they had to do in that 3 minutes. 3 minutes to arrive home, pull the family car into the garage, enter the home through the garage, discover and comprehend that Sultana, Tariq, and Basma had been brutally attacked and lay dead in 3 different areas of that house.
The revelation startled the defense, but Song Richardson was thinking on her feet.
I'm asking you, how long does it take to walk into a house and see these 2 brutally butchered bodies of Atif's family and then run downstairs and call 911?
And turn the prosecution's argument on its head.
How long is 3 minutes? Well, let's see. That was about a minute and a half.
But remember, it wasn't just the murders. In that 3 minutes, the boys also had to figure out there'd been a burglary and that a VCR and Discman were missing.
There's been some kind of break-in.
I hear the voice of a person who has contrived a story that can only be explained by somebody who knew very well what had happened in the Rafay family home.
I was out of my mind at the time. I was totally in shock, totally staggered and confounded and was almost totally hysterical.
In a case where every minute matters, the defense bolsters their claim of the boys' innocence by playing up statements the neighbors on both sides of the Rafay house gave to police in the days following the murders. The neighbors initially said that they heard pounding coming from inside the Rafay house at a time when the boys have an airtight alibi.
You were standing in this driveway and
Mark Seidel lived right next door to the Rafays.
How loud were the bangs you were hearing?
They're pretty hard hits. A little bit harder than you'd hang a picture.
Seidel says back then he didn't think a murder was taking place next door and figured the Rafays, who had just moved in, were probably unpacking.
I sort of thought about going over and helping them so they could go to sleep, but luckily that night I didn't.
The Rafays' other next-door neighbor, Julie Rackley, testified that she also heard sounds.
Initially, I thought it just sounded like hammering. It had sort of an odd resonance to it.
The neighbors who heard these sounds described them in great detail, and verified what they were for the police, all heard them well before 10 o'clock at night.
And at 10 o'clock, Sebastian and Atif were still seen at the movie theater.
If the jury believes these initial reports that Mark Seidel and Judy Rackley gave to police, your case could be in trouble.
Absolutely. You can't be in two places at one time. There's no debating that point.
There are two independent neighbors who separately heard the murder happen at the end of twilight before 10 o'clock. And we were known to be on the other side of town when that happened. It was impossible for us to have committed this crime.
Prosecutors contend it is possible. Even though the boys were seen going to the 9:50 movie, there's no proof that they stayed.
Is there a way for these two boys to exit the theater without drawing attention to themselves, say during the movie?
Jose Martinez sold the boys movie tickets that night, and he showed us how they could sneak out from this theater.
Got this exit behind the curtain or the other one over there.
So if they slip through this curtain, you're not letting any light into the theater.
Correct.
Then up these stairs.
And out this exit door.
Doors outside.
The defense protested that even though it could have happened that way, there was no proof that it did, and that prosecutors were grasping at straws to get a conviction.
They sifted through Sebastian's history and his life, and Atif's history and his life, and tried to find anything that would make them look like bad people.
In fact, months into the trial, prosecutors brought this intriguing surprise witness from the boys' past, who said she had evidence that could turn the case. But first, they would have to convince the judge to let the jury hear what she had to say.
You swear or affirm.
Nazgul Shifte was a friend from the boys' high school days who had dated Sebastian.
What was this comment that Sebastian Burns made that stood out at you?
He said, I want to try to kill someone one day to see how it would feel, because I think I would find it enjoyable.
She claimed a late-night conversation she'd had years ago with the boys in her bedroom had planted the seeds for murder.
Did you think he was serious?
He wasn't laughing, and he said it in a serious tone.
Sebastian doesn't deny having the conversation, but emphatically says he wasn't serious.
It's a one-line paraphrase of a sarcasm from a hippy-dippy 3 a.m. conversation 10 years ago, and I can't remember enough about it to defend myself against it.
If anyone would reflect on that and think, imagine if the worst parts of my personality, maybe the worst moments when I was 18 years old, that I would be reminded of them for the next 9 years of my life, and that in the public's eye would be the person that I'd become, I think people would really shudder. It's a nightmare.
Thank you for your time and your testimony.
It was certainly damning testimony, but the jury would never hear it.
There is no question, had I known about this last spring, I would have admitted this. 4 months into this thing, I can't stop this process and let everyone dash to the four winds to try and research this.
The judge's decision flustered prosecutors. But there's another witness, more powerful and much more damning.
You swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to
The friend the boys swore would never betray them.
Do you recognize Mr. Burns and Mr. Rafay in the courtroom here today?
Yes, I do.
It had been years since Jimmy Miyoshi had seen his high school buddies, Sebastian and Atif. Jimmy had moved to Japan and was living under another name when prosecutors forced him to return to Seattle and face his friends at their murder trial.
He was, in no uncertain terms, conflicted In fact, he spent the last 2 or 3 years of his life trying to avoid the eventuality of being compelled to come to court and testify against his two best friends.
Jimmy could have easily been sitting next to his best friends, charged with a crime. Back in 1995, during the undercover operation, Jimmy was also a target of the RCMP. The RCMP believed Miyoshi helped the boys plan the murder of the Rafay family, and they wanted him to give a full confession on tape, just like his friends had done.
You know what went on down there in that house? What went on? Yeah.
But no matter how much he was pressed for details, Miyoshi refused to implicate his friends in the murder.
Yeah, you know who killed the parents? Yeah. Who? Is that what you want? Yeah. And I just want you to explain to me exactly the purposes of you wanting to know. Is that so we can establish this kind of totally for trust? Totally for trust? Totally.
In some ways, was Jimmy Miyoshi the smartest of them all?
He's not in jail.
In fact, Jimmy was arrested with Sebastian and Atif and interrogated by authorities in Canada.
He was told that he might face the death penalty himself. He was told that his family, his job, his future would be ruined unless he said that Sebastian and Atif confessed to him.
Back then, Jimmy told the police that his friends were innocent.
At the time of your arrest on July 31, 1995, were they honest answers?
They were answers that, I guess, the intention of a lot of those answers was to protect Sebastian and Atif.
At that point, on July 31, 1995, why is it that you gave answers that were designed to protect Sebastian and Atif?
And I guess it was also in a way to protect myself, but in general, because I didn't want Sebastian and Atif to get arrested and potentially convicted.
But under increasing pressure, Miyoshi eventually agreed to cooperate. And in exchange, he was granted immunity from charges of conspiracy to commit murder. Suddenly, he began to reveal more to the police about what he knew. But now the question loomed. Would Miyoshi betray his best friends?
Had this subject ever come up before, the notion of Atif Rafay killing his family?
No, this was the first time.
In a halting voice that often dropped to a whisper, Jimmy told the court that it was during a drive from Seattle to Vancouver when Atif first brought up the idea of killing his family.
What was your response to the notion of Atif's notion of killing his family?
I guess I was listening, and I mean, he was my friend at the time, and I guess in a way I was neutral on that notion.
On the stand, Jimmy recounted a discussion about how the boys would commit the crime.
Remember which methods were discussed?
I remember something about gassing the house, and I remember a discussion about, I guess, using a baseball bat.
What do you remember about why a baseball bat could or should be used?
I guess a quick and a painless way of killing someone.
I don't think there's any question that he was a sounding board for them.
The prosecution says Jimmy consulted on an especially chilling part of the plan. Sebastian and Atif stayed here at the Rafay family home during the 5 days before the murders. And it was no coincidence. It was part of the plan, prosecutors say, to commit the perfect crime.
If they had been living in the house previously, that any kind of hair or whatever samples that were collected after wouldn't necessarily mean that they had done it.
By virtue of their being in the house for several days, any fingerprint that would be found or could be found could be explained as a result of their having been there for several days. Any hair evidence that might be found could be explained for them having been in the house for several days prior to the murders.
It's diabolical, but it's pretty clever.
Damn clever.
Finally, Jimmy gave the prosecution what they needed. He said that Atif watched while Sebastian bludgeoned the family.
I remember hearing about how, I guess, Atif was pretty distraught, and that from the moment that Sebastian had struck his mother, that it was kind of there's no going back. And
how hard was it to sit and listen to Jimmy Miyoshi's testimony?
It was enormously difficult. I think it was difficult for him as well. As I say, I am outraged that he did it, but at the same time, I think I reserve my real outrage for the people who forced him to do it.
Did you discuss a plan to murder the Rafay family with Jimmy Miyoshi?
No, we didn't. Never.
Why did Jimmy Miyoshi testify that you did?
Because he had a life sentence held to his head. And if he didn't say what the police and the prosecution wanted him to say, that life sentence was going to go off.
It's the first time in 8 years that you have ever said anything like that, isn't it, sir?
I'm not sure.
And isn't what happened?
The defense tried to hammer back. Jimmy once lied to save his friends, so he could be easily lying now to save himself.
You're making it up as you go along, sir. That's why you're saying things for the first time yesterday.
No, I don't believe I am.
Do you believe that Jimmy Miyoshi is a liar?
Jimmy Miyoshi is a self-admitted liar. Jimmy Miyoshi acknowledges that he has lied. The question will be, how many lies does Jimmy Miyoshi get to tell? Mr. Miyoshi, this conversation was on
The defense
September
needed to come back with something strong, and they had an arsenal of forensic evidence that flew in the face of Miyoshi's testimony. They told the jury that there were 3 killers in the house that night. Experts analyzed the patterns of blood on the wall and found drops everywhere except this area, where there was no blood, indicating another killer may have stood there during the attack. They also said a pillow was moved during the bludgeoning.
So we have killer number 1 moving the pillow. We have killer number 2 bludgeoning Dr. Rafay with the bat. And then we have killer number 3 who has to remain in the exact same place throughout the entire duration of the attack on Dr. Rafay.
And there was even more tangible evidence. A single hair on Tariq Rafay's bed.
According to the police officers there, this was an important hair because this hair, according to the Bellevue Police Department, would tell them who committed this crime.
Did it match Atif?
No.
Sebastian?
No.
Sultana?
No.
Basma?
No.
Tariq?
No. We don't know whether that hair originated from someone who sat in the same seat that Sebastian Burns sat in at the movie theater, or whether it was picked up by Dr. Rafay at his workplace, or how it got on that bed.
Or if it was a hair from the killer.
Or if it was a hair from the killer.
Prosecutors also added DNA evidence needs to fit a pattern and appear in more than one place at a crime scene.
That DNA profile appeared nowhere else in that house. There was absolutely no other pattern of trace evidence that could even be remotely suggested to be related to that hair. That was an isolated hair.
So, with the forensic evidence inconclusive, the case comes down to whom the jury would believe.
You're saying the testimony of one of my best friends, don't listen to that. My own words on the videotape, don't listen to that. Just take my word for it. We didn't do it.
Defense calls Sebastian Burns.
All rise for the jury.
More than 100 witnesses would take the stand in the State versus Burns and Rafay.
Could you kill again? Circumstances are right.
Finally, Canada's most secret undercover operation would be exposed before the jury. And so would the question that had lingered for so many years.
Why would you confess to a murder you didn't do?
At that point, it seemed like the only safe choice. It seemed like the best choice.
Why on earth would anyone confess to a murder they didn't do unless they were petrified that they were actually going to be killed themselves or people they loved were going to come to some type of harm?
The defense set out to prove that the scales were tipped from the beginning. Professional liars.
In 1975, I was first trained in undercover work.
Against teenage boys.
Have you worked as the primary undercover operator before?
Yes.
I am frightened by the fact that this kind of undercover operation can be used ostensibly to search for the truth when it is built in whole on lies and manipulation and threats.
Mr. Burns, come on forward.
Sebastian would have to convince the jury to believe him now and not to believe what he said on those tapes.
I was in way over my head, and I did not want to be involved with these guys.
I was upset with myself for having agreed to drive the car.
Sebastian began his side of the story with the first assignment from the crime boss, transporting that stolen car.
What was your reaction when you heard that they wanted you to drive this stolen car?
Well, pretty quickly, I felt that I'd been tricked.
Sebastian, why didn't you just look at him and say, I am out of here. Walk away.
No, but there is no walking away.
You want to know what I did my time for? I told to the guy. When it came time for court, the person that could finger me, they're not around anymore.
Sebastian says he couldn't walk away from criminals whose power seemed to be so far-reaching.
I believe that if I'd cross them, or if they weren't happy with me, or if they thought that I was going to betray them, that they would have me killed.
I just assumed that, you, with your connections, that if I were to you around, okay, I would just assume that I would wake up one day with a bullet in my head.
On the stand, Song Richardson pressed Sergeant Hazlitt about his scare tactics.
Sebastian could easily, very easily, have believed that you and your organization would hurt people if they crossed you, right?
He could have believed it, yes.
And that you would kill people if they ever crossed you, right?
Well, I've never said that. It goes to Sebastian Burns' imagination. Let him sit back when he goes home at night and imagine whatever he chooses to.
Is there any time in which your character directly threatens Sebastian Burns?
No, never.
The idea was not to frighten Sebastian, but to make him comfortable talking about murder to other murderers.
I know you did that, murder. That's why you're here, because you're told.
Could Sebastian Burns have walked away from his relationship with you at any time he chose to do so?
Without a doubt, he didn't have to return our calls.
Hey, it's Sebastian leaving message number 3.
Sebastian stayed, the defense argued, because he believed the Bellevue police were fabricating evidence against him.
I'm going to show you something. You never saw this from me.
That phony memo detailing the evidence that the cops had against the boys.
Just read this piece of
The undercover operators only offered to destroy the evidence if Sebastian confessed.
You don't say to Sebastian, look, Sebastian, if you didn't do it, just say so. We'll still deal with that evidence for you. We'll deal with it so you won't get convicted. But if you didn't do it, just say so. We'll still help. You never said that, right?
No, I didn't say that because, up until this time, Sebastian Burns had never denied the involvement in the murders to me.
Going into the meeting on July 18th, what was your plan?
My plan was to claim to be the murderer that they insisted that they believed that I was.
And to be convincing, Sebastian says he studied newspaper accounts, so he'd know details of the murders.
What'd you do first? The mother. Then? And dad and sister.
As the cameras rolled, Sebastian confirmed the police theory that the weapon was a baseball bat.
Did you use a metal or a wooden bat?
And the eerie notion that the killer had showered before leaving.
They could shower to clean off, blood and that kind of stuff.
And that wasn't the only reason why detectives found no blood on the boys.
How do you it's on a baseball bat? You have to shower, have no blood on you.
Do it.
Sebastian pointed out how he and Atif would profit from the crime.
Whatever money we get, it's like we would invest it in our film, I guess.
And he gave up the most sought-after clue, the loophole in the alibi.
What'd you do the dirty deed?
During the movie. And I'm gonna get you out of the trouble you're in.
Flattered.
Huh?
I'm flattered by your attention.
Atif explained that while Sebastian killed his family, he staged a break-in.
What did you do when you were in the house?
Stood around. Ranked out the VCR.
You told Hazlitt, am I correct, that you committed these murders of the Rafay family, during the movie? Am I right?
Correct.
That the VCR was taken to also contribute to the simulation of a breaking and entering?
That's right.
You had the alibi of the movie.
The prosecution had another bombshell ready to drop on the defense. It wasn't the first time Sebastian used a movie as an alibi.
You got into a car collision, didn't you?
Yes.
And you were driving your family car at the time?
That's correct, yes.
I mean, you hit a pole in a parking lot. Did you own up to it at the time?
No, I did not.
When he was 16, Sebastian staged an elaborate cover-up to conceal the fact that he had wrecked the family car.
Mr. Burns, the reality is what you said about doing was very similar to what you told Hazlitt you did in this case. Isn't that correct?
I told Hazlitt that we committed a murder, which we didn't do.
Well, Mr. Burns, let me stop you there for a moment.
Roger David Heiser drew a haunting parallel between the accident scene and the murder scene. Back in high school, Sebastian went to great lengths to make it seem like someone else did the damage while he was at the movie. But the insurance company caught him in the cover-up.
And in March of 1992, albeit with this stupid little car crash, what you decided to do was to pick up the pieces of evidence that were at the scene of this collision. Am I right?
Correct.
You put those back in your car, am I correct?
Correct.
You took them to an entirely different location in North Vancouver, am I right?
Correct.
And you staged a scene in a parking lot, am I right?
Basically.
You manipulated the evidence to appear as though it was something that it wasn't. Am I right?
Yes.
And the reason you did that, sir, was so that you could say that this accident occurred while you were at the movies. Am I right?
Correct.
Sir, you weren't at the movies when that accident occurred, were you?
No. The difference is that the first one is a car accident and the second one is a homicide.
That's correct, Mr. Burns. That is a difference.
And the difference is also that in the first case, I was responsible for the car accident, and in the second case, I had nothing to do with this homicide.
David Heiser wasn't about to let that statement go in front of the jury. He had more of that damning tape.
Can I tell you something? Like, I felt like, I was capable. And, like, have you ever killed a person?
And on July 18th of 1995, after you told him that you had in fact killed the Rafay family, you told him that you did it because you felt capable of killing, right?
Correct, yes.
Did you see it happen?
Yeah. All three?
No, only one.
Which one?
My mom.
The demeanor with which they deliver this message of what they accomplished that night in Bellevue is chilling.
Did any of them fight?
Yeah.
Well, that's a story that hasn't really been told, because
I've been telling you.
I know that.
You can hear Atif giggling in the background and kind of going, oh God, oh God.
Basically, his father was nothing, and curious episode was the sister who basically, was standing up and walking around or whatever, and so took a little effort.
Your behavior on that tape, when there's some laughing, did you think that the murder of the Rafay family was some sort of a comedy?
No, absolutely not. But we were lying, and I was not thinking about the murder of the Rafay family when I was talking.
To a certain extent, I had essentially put the real events out of my mind entirely, so that I was really only thinking of the story that I was selling to Mr. Hazlitt.
That's not part of a story that two scared individuals come up with because they think it's what two mafia characters want to hear. That's the truth. That's the truth coming from the mind of Atif Rafay and Sebastian Burns.
It's a challenge to sum it all up in a couple of hours.
6 months of testimony comes down to one final argument.
There is no gray area. There is nothing in between. Either you must believe what Sebastian Burns says and every single thing he says, or you must convict him.
James Conant will speak for the state.
You like your odds?
Very much.
Are you ready?
Absolutely.
Jeff Robinson knows this is his last chance in front of the jury, and he will have to counter with everything he has.
How many times does the evidence have to tell us it's not Sebastian and it's not Atif before we listen? Please listen.
He points to the bloody scene in Tariq's bedroom and evidence of 3 killers.
3 people went into Dr. Rafay's room, and there are 3 unknown DNA profiles.
Robinson reminds them that there is no forensic evidence linking the boys to the crime.
And the question that you're required to ask yourselves is, what has the state shown me to make me believe that he is guilty without having one reason to doubt it?
Mr. Conant, the floor is yours.
Your Honor, thank you. There can be no doubt in your mind that these 2 are the killers.
The prosecution insists it is Sebastian's own words that leave no room for doubt.
How did you f*** 3 people at once? I don't watch it when I hear that.
And ultimately, the words that came out of Sebastian Burns' mouth led to his demise. His hubris led to his demise.
What would be most compelling to the 12 jurors? Would it be the neighbors who thought they heard the murders that night when the boys were spotted at the movie theater? Or would they be haunted by Jimmy Miyoshi's words damning his 2 former best friends? Would the jury believe that Sebastian was scared of those undercover operators? Or is this the picture of a young man who thinks he's about to get away with murder? For the last time, the jury is asked to envision the last moments in the Rafay family home.
This is the horror that they left behind, ladies and gentlemen. This is what we must not lose sight of.
Finally, it is up to the jury to make its decision.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you're retired to deliberate your verdicts.
In the script for The Great Despisers, 2 boys are wrongfully convicted and executed. After 4 days of deliberations, 10 years after the murders, the final act in the real-life plotline.
All rise for the jury.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Glenn Sebastian Burns, guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree as charged in count 1. Verdict form 1F. We, the jury, find the defendant, Atif Ahmed Rafay, guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree as charged in count 3.
I did not believe that they didn't have reasonable doubt. I just didn't believe it.
I'm afraid of him. I think he's very scary. I looked at him a few times and he was glaring at me personally, and anybody that commit a crime like that is a frightening person.
I was looking at individual jurors just to see if they, I don't know, I guess I was looking for some kind of an answer.
I wonder how they sleep at night. I wonder how they came to that decision.
Back up here, one way or the other.
With the verdict that was given, can you sleep well at night now?
Yes.
No second thoughts?
No.
No way.
Not with anyone?
Not a doubt. Nope.
I personally myself, to the very day of the end of the trial, wanted them to be innocent. And in the end, I was totally overcome by the evidence, obviously. But I think all of us were wishing that some suspect would be guilty so that we could not convict these two young men.
On October 22nd, 2004, 5 months after the verdict,
Good morning. Pete.
Sebastian and Atif were back in court.
Sebastian, anything to say before they put you away?
This time to hear their sentence from the judge.
Send Mr. Burns a very clear message that he has been found guilty. Send him to prison for the rest of his natural life, times 3 consecutive life sentences.
Mr. Burns?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Sebastian had his own message for the court.
With all due respect to the jurors, the verdict was wrong.
In the audience were jurors who had convicted him and the undercover operators who had sealed his fate.
I certainly feel sorry for the victims. I feel sorry for their surviving son.
This was his only expression of sympathy
Before I continue, I would just encourage you to consider.
in a speech that went on
And that's
for
what
almost 2
our
hours.
jury was made to have.
I want to insist today on the truth that we are innocent.
Atif never took the stand during the trial.
And I love my parents. I revere their memory to this day.
He used this moment to admit he was ashamed.
Your Honor, the impersonation that I gave on those videotapes, there's no relation, is alien to everything that I've ever felt or thought. I truly admired my father. I was probably closer to my mother than to any other person that I ever will be. And the memory of her wit and her charm and her keen human sympathy, they're dear to me to this day.
Mr. Rafay, thank you. Unlike your colleague, I find you genuinely remorseful, Mr. Rafay. I think the tragedy for you and ultimately your family was a meeting, a fateful meeting at probably a school cafeteria or a school ground, I don't know where it occurred, with Mr. Burns.
Judge Mertel saved his harshest words for Sebastian Burns.
Mr. Burns, you're not immoral. You're amoral. You are an arrogant, convicted killer. You are not a kid, as you so often refer to yourself. You're an adult, and you will be held responsible as an adult for your premeditated, naked, vicious massacre of this family. It is therefore the conclusion of this court that you should be sentenced on count 1 to life without possibility of parole, count 2 to life without possibility of parole, and on count 3 to life without possibility of parole, those 3 sentences to run consecutively.
Back up here.
It's taken them a decade, but prosecutors will send the Rafay's only son and his best friend to prison for life.
We've been saying all along, they thought they planned the perfect murder.
justice has been done for the 3 victims, and our community has held the 2 individuals responsible for this accountable for their conduct. There is a great deal of satisfaction in being part of that, a great deal of satisfaction.
Before we begin, just a trigger warning. The following episode contains references to graphic physical violence. Please listen with care. Welcome to Killer Conversation, a podcast about the criminal mind. My name is Judy Ryback, and I'm a longtime 48 Hours producer. This is part 2 of my conversation with Peter Van Sant about his interviews with 2 convicted killers, Sebastian Burns and Atif Rafay. Burns and Rafay were just teenagers when they murdered Rafay's family, and they might never have been caught were it not for a Canadian sting known as the Mr. Big operation. So, Peter, Mr. Big, what is that?
So this was a unit within the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, an undercover unit that would pose as a organized crime family. And they had the ability, when they had a target, to get that person entwined in their illegal business, what the target thought would be illegal. One of the undercover officers told me, Peter, we have never had a target who we did not successfully pull into our organized crime family. And he said, I'm talking doctors, lawyers, bankers. They were brilliant at this. And so the house was bugged, and an undercover officer hears that Sebastian is going to get his hair cut at a salon in downtown Vancouver. And they decide this is our moment to make an approach to him. They'd also learned that Sebastian and Atif had been working on a screenplay called The Great Despisers. And it's a story about 2 young men wrongfully accused of murdering a family. Wow, where did they get that idea, Judy? Where do you think they got that? And so when Sebastian came out of the barber shop, there was a member of the Mr. Big undercover team waiting who approaches him and says, hey, how's it going? You know, I left my keys in my car here. You know, can you do me a favor? Drive me down to the local hotel. I got an extra set of keys down there. And so the adventure with the Mr. Big team began.
Right. They went to a bar and they started talking and forming a relationship. And because they knew about the screenplay, they sort of used that to reel him in, right? Like at some point he said, I know somebody who I think can fund your movie, who can give you money to make your film. Let's go meet him. And that very same night, they went to go meet with Mr. Big, who they called Al, right?
Yes. I've met Al. I've interviewed Al in shadow. All the guys on this undercover team were among the most talented I have ever seen. They looked like character actors out of a Hollywood movie. And not long after they meet, this mobster Al, Mr. Big, he asked Sebastian to drive a very expensive stolen car from Whistler Mountain outside of Vancouver back to the city. And Sebastian agreed. And after the delivery, Sebastian was paid $200. That made him angry because he wanted a lot more money than that. But instead of running away from what he thought was a criminal enterprise, Sebastian told them he wanted more money.
Right.
This is what, remember I told you, these guys said we always get somebody. Once they see our world, we're able to hook somebody.
They know their audience, right?
So he and Jimmy Miyoshi, remember his roommate, they agreed to start laundering money for this Mr. Big enterprise, and they were paid $2,000 for that. Oh, these are guys that can't get jobs. They're suddenly raking in the dough. They're having excitement. They're living on the edge.
Right.
And Sebastian ends up working for this criminal enterprise for nearly 4 months.
I think we should just clarify that Jimmy Miyoshi was a high school friend who they were living with at the time of the sting operation. So eventually, Sebastian was asked if he was willing to, ready for this, commit murder.
The only reason why I'm talking like that, if you follow the whole conversation, you'll see he's asking me a lot of questions about how does my conscience handle crime. And this is after he's already confessed to me that he's a murderer himself. And after he's also told me that he's worried that I'm a threat to his organization. He's worried that I'm reluctant to work for them. And it was clear that he was worried that I was going to tell them to the police. And the only conceivable purpose, I told him at this point that that wouldn't bother my conscience, but I wouldn't want to do it myself. And he continued to ask me questions.
But you're saying I'd do it, but I wouldn't do it. You're saying, yeah, I'd kill somebody, but, I guess I wouldn't kill somebody. Is that what you're saying we should take from that exchange?
Well, what you should take from that exchange is that I was trying to satisfy him that I wasn't going to tell the police what he had just confessed to me. And I also told him, however, that I didn't want to do it. I mean, the sum total...
Aren't we getting a glimpse here into the real Sebastian Burns, the man who had murdered a family and is now telling one of these undercover guys, you're willing to do it again?
No, that's completely not true. And if you read the rest of that excerpt, Peter, I think that it will be more clear that what I'm telling him there is that I do not want to do that.
So is it true? Did he try to walk away? Did he ever say no to anything?
No, he stays. He says because he was afraid of what they would do to him if he didn't. But we already know that he is delighted, and they've heard on these bugging devices, he's delighted by the money that's coming in.
So they tell the boys that they've heard that there's evidence against them in the case in Washington, right? They have a memo that they show them that says that police found hairs and DNA and blood evidence that's gonna turn the whole case around. And they tell the boys that that they can help get rid of that evidence.
Yeah, this is really convincing stuff. This is very persuasive to him that, oh my God, they've got this evidence, and Mr. Big, with all his connections, can destroy that evidence. But Sebastian has to agree to do something. What is it, Judy?
He has to confess to the murders.
That's right. And this is very clever. And this is where, in the United States at that time, if there was an undercover operation like this, you tell me, would this be admissible?
No, absolutely not. Yeah. You're
absolutely right. It would not be admissible. And Sebastian is, he's heading down that drain. It's swirling, and he's losing control, because now they're going to have to tell Mr. Big exactly what happened, to Mr. Big's satisfaction, at Atif's family's home. And eventually Sebastian and Atif are sitting in a room with Mr. Big. They're unaware that there's a hidden video camera, and it's recording every second of their conversation, picture and sound.
So this is Atif's first meeting with Mr. Big and his people. What did they say? What did they tell them about the murders?
There's no doubt about it. Sebastian admits to doing the murders, and he details how he did it, beginning with the mother, then the father, then the daughter, all beaten with a bat.
Yeah, the way he confesses on that undercover tape is so matter of fact, and at times he even laughs about it. You talk to him about that.
Your behavior on that tape, when there's some laughing, did you think that the murder of the Rafay family was some sort of a comedy?
No, absolutely not. But we were lying, and I was not thinking about the murder of the Rafay family when I was talking. I was trying to pass off a story, and for whatever reason, I guess the way that the whole ordeal affected me was to get nervous and to kind of giggle a bit. And I mean, in one sense, I was trying to act casual, and in another way, I I guess, just genuinely giggling nervously.
You laugh when you say Bosma needed a little extra bat work. That's sick, isn't it?
Well, yes. I don't want to split hairs, but the quote is actually a little more effort. I mean, not that it's much better, and I guess that is just splitting hairs, but at the same time, it's a little bit different.
That's not any better. Effort is still outrageous. You laugh when you're talking about killing Bosma.
Yeah, well, we were lying, and at that point, I felt very awkward because I didn't know what to say about it to Al, because we didn't do it, and I was making up a story, and I was chuckling awkwardly because I didn't know what to say. And we had already heard some of the details in the newspaper about what supposedly happened there. And I was just in a really awkward position. And I was just kind of chuckling nervously.
Sebastian, aren't we looking at you on this videotape? The real Sebastian Burns, the person who planned this murder, killed these people, and has no conscience to the point where you can laugh about it.
No, that's completely wrong. No, you are never seeing the real me on any of these tapes, in my opinion.
In my opinion, what an odd thing to say. Sebastian claims he was forced to confess, that he was afraid of what the mob boss might do to him if he didn't. So Atif is there that day, and he also confessed. They needed both boys there, right?
Yeah, but Atif claims that he also felt trapped in that moment and had no choice, that, if they confessed, the mob boss was going to protect him, and destroy that evidence down in Bellevue. And if they didn't, who knows what would have happened to them.
I certainly had no way of dealing with the situation other than the one that was offered by the undercover operatives, whereby somehow they would essentially magically take care of all our problems. And I can say that I almost enjoyed the irony of making a false confession in order to obtain a true exoneration. I thought that was kind of neat.
Neat? It was neat making up a story about his murdered family?
What can I say? And like Sebastian, he laughed when he talked about the murder of his sister Bosma.
You have declined to discuss the details of these murders during the course of this interview, what you saw inside your own house.
Right.
And yet, in front of two mobsters, you laugh about it and you give complete detail about what happened inside that house. I don't get it.
It's easier to talk about a fiction than it is about the truth, I think, in that way. I didn't have any emotional feelings about a fake story that I was telling.
He doesn't ever have any emotional feelings, or it doesn't appear that he's emotional. Anyway, to a lot of people, what the Canadian officers did feels like entrapment and coerced confessions. In fact, Sebastian's sister made a documentary about the Mr. Big operation that got Innocence International to take on Atif and Sebastian's case. But all of the appeals were denied.
At the time when I was covering this, and the way it was explained in court, is that this was an undercover operation that was completely legal in Canada at that time. Eventually, it became illegal, but at that time it was legal. And here in the U.S., there was an exception called the Silver Platter Doctrine, which said that if an operation was legal in the country where it was conducted, it was then admissible here in the United States. And defense attorneys tried to get the video thrown out, but the judge in Sebastian and Atif's trial allowed jurors to watch it. And on it, the boys confess.
Do you think they would have been convicted without those tapes?
I am not sure that they would have been convicted with what the neighbors had heard of these killings going on at a time when the boys were seen in a movie theater. I think there is hung jury was a real possibility, or an acquittal was a real possibility. This was the moment.
Right. Or there may never have been a trial, right?
Those of you who've been listening to all this, what do you think?
Right.
If that tape had not been played, would these boys have been convicted?
Right.
I think there's an excellent chance that they would not have been.
So a little over a year after the murders, they tell these Canadian officers that they committed the murders, but it took nearly 6 years to extradite them. Why?
Well, at the heart of this was the death penalty. There is no death penalty for murder in Canada, and the Canadian government said they're not going to extradite the boys until the judge in this case agreed to take, and prosecutors agreed to take the death penalty off the table, which eventually happened.
Right. Both boys were represented by public defenders, and there's kind of a crazy story about how they were pulled off the case.
Yeah.
Is it true that Sebastian had sex with one of his attorneys?
Yeah. So I'll leave her name out of it. She's been through so much. But he had this dynamic woman attorney that was considered one of the best in the public defender's office. She had gone to Japan to see Jimmy Miyoshi. Remember, he was Sebastian and Atif's roommate in Vancouver, British Columbia. And Jimmy had been accused of conspiring in the murders, and he made a deal with the state to testify against his friends, and then he moved to Japan. Well, Sebastian's lawyer flew to Japan to meet with him, and she came back. She was incredibly excited because she claimed that Jimmy told her that he felt leaned on to make the deal, and she was excited that if she could present this in court, it would completely undermine him as a witness. And I was told by the prosecutor in the case, who talked to the guards who watched some of this unfold, she ran into the meeting room. She gives him this big hug. She tells him the news. They hug again, and then the hug immediately progressed into removal of clothing. A guard who was watching all of this called 2 other guards over, and because they were on a slightly second floor that they could look down and see this window on the door, this small window, could see inside. And they said, "Do you see what I see? Okay. Do you see what I see? Yeah, we all know what that is. Okay. Well, then let's go break this up." And it's a felony to have sex with an inmate in jail like that. And she had her law license suspended. She was taken off the case. And she had a partner who was incredibly bright and talented. And the 2 of them were taken off because they were a team. So when these 2 defense attorneys come in, instead of having years of research behind them, they had a few months to get prepared for this. And that was devastating to Sebastian and Atif's case.
So speaking of Jimmy Miyoshi, he had a lot to say in his deposition. He said that Atif told him that he had wanted to kill his family and that he was present when Sebastian killed his mother.
Yeah, he said he'd been present when Sebastian and Atif had discussed their plans to murder the family. And he specifically said he recalled them saying that they planned to stay at the Rafay home for a few days before the murders so their DNA and hair would be explainable when it was discovered during forensic examination.
Part of the plan, part of the master plan. So there was a bit of physical evidence that showed that there might have been someone else involved in the murder, at least of Tariq. What was that?
Well, there was a hair, just a single hair found on the body of Tariq Rafay that didn't belong to anyone in the family or Sebastian. Now, of course, Tariq worked in the outside world, and being at work, if somebody had given him a hug or anything else, you could see transference there. But there was also, and this was really strange, there was blood in the garage that was discovered that didn't belong to anyone in the family or to Sebastian. And also then, don't forget the 2 neighbors who testified that they heard a commotion at the house at a time when the boys were in that movie theater.
Right. So Sebastian took the witness stand, which doesn't surprise me at all. What about you?
It doesn't surprise me. I'll use that phrase, brilliantly stupid.
Right.
His attorneys said, "Don't do this. We have a chance. There's some reasonable doubt in here. And do not do this." And Sebastian insisted.
If he was anything like he was in your interview, I can only imagine that the jury just hated him.
Yeah, he had that same attitude.
Right.
He was very put out while answering questions. And that attitude is of I'm smarter than you, and I'm the one you should believe.
So at his sentencing, Sebastian never showed any remorse, told the jurors they were wrong, and went on for nearly 2 hours. What did he say?
Yeah, I was there. This was theater in the round, one-man performance. He talked to the judge directly, but also then turned back to talk to the people in the room, all of us that were there. He insisted he was innocent, repeated himself over and over about why the jury was wrong. He threw his defense team under the bus, called them ineffective. He claimed he didn't know he would testify until the morning of and was unprepared. That's not true. Defense attorney had told me that they had urged him not to do this. He forced them to put him on the stand. He insisted that he had not had his day in court and asked that if he could have a new trial and represent himself. The judge told him to wrap it up many times.
This is what the judge said when he sentenced Sebastian to 3 consecutive life sentences. Mr. Burns, you are not immoral, you are amoral. You are an arrogant, convicted killer. You are not a kid, as you so often refer to yourself. You're an adult, and you will be held responsible as an adult for your premeditated, naked, vicious massacre of this family. Of all the mic drops I've ever heard delivered from the bench, that was epic.
If I may say, a touch of genius from the judge. Such, as Atif might say, such irony for the two geniuses whose brilliance and arrogance had turned on them and led to their demise.
Yes, yes. On the other hand, Atif seemed to get choked up at his sentencing. He didn't admit to his crime, but he showed remorse for his behavior.
For the first time, and I had interviewed him and things, I saw some humanity there. The big question always in a situation like that is he sad for what he did, or is he sad that he got caught?
Right, exactly. And was it genuine, or was he just terrified? So they both got 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. And of course, they vowed to fight their wrongful conviction, but they're never getting out, right?
Well, it's doubtful now. Sebastian has exhausted all of his appeals. Atif has 1 more to go. But I think it is very doubtful that that they will ever see life outside of a prison cell. Here's an exchange I had with Atif.
How would you describe what has happened to you?
I don't know. I guess we'd have to use words like disaster and calamity and other things. It's very easy to fall into the rut of self-pity, and so I try not to think on it too much. Luckily, it's very easy to, I guess, think of other things and fall into a sort of unmindfulness of your present situation.
And here's Sebastian.
Do you still see the images of their bodies when you think about the Rafay house, when you think about that night? Can you still see it in your mind's eye? Is it something you live with, that memory?
Truly, I don't know. It was something that was very much with me for, I know, the first year after it happened, especially with the first few weeks. It's been 10 years now. And so, in a lot of ways, I'm over it.
Why do you think they never turned on each other?
I still believe that they believe, and this is what has sustained them all these years, is that one day they will outsmart the system on appeal. They're down to their last one for Atif. And I don't think Atif could ever have turned on Sebastian, his idol and his mentor.
Right. So today they're both 49 years old. They're still in custody in the Monroe Correctional Complex. Atif was married in 2017, but is now divorced. Not surprisingly, he seems to have been or is a model prisoner, studying and teaching and writing papers and articles. All we know about Sebastian is that his parents visit him once a month, and according to them, he spent 10 years in solitary confinement. Well, Peter, we could go on forever, but we won't.
Yeah, somebody wrote a book about it.
Yes, you did.
That my relatives bought. Perfectly Executed is the book. I wrote it with Janet Jackson, one of the producers.
All right. Thank you again.
Yeah, and thanks for reliving this with me. It is one of the most extraordinary cases of my career, and one I'll carry with me forever.
I can see why. 48 Hours Killer Conversation is hosted and produced by me, Judy Ryback. Our story editor is Maura Walls. Alan Pang oversees recording, mixing, and sound design, fact-checking, and additional production support from Rebecca LaFlamme. And special thanks to 48 Hours executive producer Judy Tygard and Paramount Podcast Vice President Megan Marcus.